All right, we are in 2 Peter. Woohoo! Well, I get excited. I don't know about you.
Are we in the third chapter yet?
We are not quite into the third chapter. We are going to be the second half of the second chapter. And yeah, I'm trying to get my gizmo to go here. Let's see if it works. Please work. Yay, it works. Okay. So we're in 2 Peter, and we are smack dab in the middle of the false teacher section. The false teacher section. And let me just review where we've come from, because this is pretty cool. A couple weeks ago, we talked about what your faith is based upon, and that faith is actually based on something. And I'll put in my plug again. Faith is always based on something. If you ever hear someone say, well, I guess I'll go with that. I'll just have to take it by faith, which implies I have no other reason to believe this. If that's what you hear, that's not biblical faith. Biblical faith is an extension from what you know to be true. And what you know to be true is the character of God and his promises. So if I want to say something about what I can't see right now and what I can't experience because it's in the future, so I can't use any of my senses to extend out there. What I can do by faith is say, God has said, and I know God, so that's where this is going. And that's what faith is. Faith is an extension of that. I always liken it to being like a bridge. You know, the one end of the bridge that you're standing on right now before you walk on that is deeply, deeply founded in bedrock of faith. The faith is founded on fact of that bedrock. And it's well anchored. I mean, if you ever take a look at the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco, and the anchors at the two end, that sucker's anchored. It really is. Well, that anchor, that piling at the end of the bridge, is the fact and the promises and the facts of the character of God. And then that bridge takes us to a place that we can't quite see and can't quite experience, but we have utter confidence where it's going. That's faith, okay? So faith has a foundation. So he said back there, part of your faith is founded on the eyewitness testimony. And the New Testament is the eyewitness testimony of Christ. And he says it's also based on Old Testament prophecies where the prophets pointed forward hundreds and sometimes thousands of years to the coming of this Messiah Jesus. I can go to the bank on that. Those are facts as well. We're putting the pilings of the bridge here. And he says you can also go on the fact of your own personal regeneration. Something, once you come to Christ, starts to change. Sometimes it's dramatic. Sometimes it's long-term, but it nevertheless is real. And he's saying that's something you can take as well. So those three things form the basis of your faith. But the problem is, and we talked about this last week, false prophets and false teachers will sneak in and they'll try and turn those two things on their head. They will attack the prophecies from the Old Testament and they'll attack the New Testament firsthand witness testimony, and they'll start carving away at what used to be the foundations of your faith. These guys are so nasty in Peter's understanding that in today's passage, he uses clumsy, tongue-tied Greek. I mean, it's like someone gets really mad about something in your presence, not at you, but at something else, and they just go, like that. That's what his Greek is characterizing part of today. He is so mad about these guys. So you'll see in just a second here. So we found out that he says, there's with these false teachers in chapter 2, there's an abominable message and their abominable sin, and also their abominable lifestyle. Well, we covered the first two, so today we're going to do the last one. We're going to talk about this abominable lifestyle, and it makes it a little easier to spot the false teachers. So I want you today to use the criteria of today against me, because you should be doing that all the time. Anyone, in fact, who teaches you should be using this. Also use the other ones as well. So this is the easier part. So let's just dive in and see what's going to happen. Now, first I'm going to give you a quiz. You ready? Which of these two guys do you presume is a false teacher? The guy on the left, raise your hands. The guy on your right, raise your hands. But why? Why is the guy on the right more suspect? He doesn't have to be, but given all other things being equal, he raises your suspicions more. Lack of a mustache. Yeah, well, exactly. Hand in the pocket. So there's something you already know about false teachers, that they may be in it not for they're not ideologues about your growth in Christ. They might have selfish reasons, and that selfish reason many times might include greed.
And it looks like a wolf in sheep's clothing.
A wolf in sheep's clothing? He's a little too well dressed. Yeah. Makes you trust him a little bit more. What, Dave?
Tires, they stand straight up. Tails stand straight up.
Oh, his hair stands straight up. Oh. Okay, I got you. Okay. Well, you do have to wait till you hear him speak. I'm just checking to see if you already have a sense of the danger, because you should. Because what he's going to talk about today is actually reinforce your intuition right here, okay? So let's dive in. This is going to be my test guy. I got to black out his eyes because I don't know who he is. I don't want him to write me a nasty letter. So he's going to be our false teacher today, and we're going to attach to him a whole bunch of characteristics that Peter's going to come up with right now to tell us you're going to see these in false teachers. And it's really astonishingly strong. Okay, so let's go on. Let's see what he says. So we're in chapter 2, verse 10, the second half of verse 10. That's why I call it verse 10b. It's the second half. So here he is. He's going to tell you how to spot them. They are daring, self-willed. They don't tremble when they revile angelic majesties, whereas angels, who are greater in might and power, do not bring a reviling judgment against them before the Lord. What? Well, just slow down. Just go to the first part. Daring, self-willed, they don't tremble when they revile angelic majesties. So these guys are so brazen, or they are so brazen in terms of attacking the reality of the spiritual powers that exist, whether it be angels or God himself. They are so brazen, they don't know what kind of harm they're putting themselves in. And that's what the reviling is, reviling those powers and stuff. Even angelic majesties. Now, he brings this up because during their time and during our time, if you read about angels, and we should do this sometime, you read about angels in the entire Bible, and you ask yourself, do angels look like those little cherubims that they put on Valentine cards, with the little fat, little chubby little boys with the... No, they are terrifying. Really. I mean, the word angel comes from the Greek word angelos, like Los Angeles, Los Angeles. Angelos just means messenger. They are messengers, but they're messengers with power. And I've mentioned this once before. You go back to the Old Testament, there's a case where David has sinned, King David has sinned, and God is bringing judgment on Jerusalem because of what the king has done. And at the very end of that, in that confrontation, an angel is coming with a drawn sword to destroy Jerusalem. One angel, one sword. Yeah.
Is there any place in Old Testament where angels are trying to be resurrected men?
There's nowhere in the Old Testament where angels are trying to be resurrected men. Nowhere. None. Zero. No nothing at all. Nothing. Angels are different from us, but they are included in the passages as being messengers who have the power to get their point across. And they also bring judgment. So these are not dudes to be messed with. And they're definitely not dudes to be reviled against in public by these guys. So these guys have such a poor understanding of the danger they're putting themselves in that they just kind of do it in public. Go, oh yeah, let them strike me down. I'll count to 5. Do it, God. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. See, I'm still here. It's these kinds of guys. And the closest picture I could get to illustrate that is this. There's the false teacher on the right, and there's the angelic majesties on the left. He can sit there and say all he wants about how powerless that tiger is, but someday it's going to wake up, and he's going to be in deep weeds. He might be dinner, yeah. So that's what we're talking about right here. They totally revile these majesties, these powers, and speak out against the gods who is living, and the angels who are God's messengers with power to bring judgment even. And they have no clue what kind of brazen danger they put themselves in. That's how bold these guys are, speaking out against God himself. And it says in 11 right there, what he's saying right there is those very ones, those angels that he might be even offending, they ought to be able to just walk into the presence of God and say, God, there's this false teacher down here, and he's saying really bad things about you and about us. I think it's time to just snuff him out. What do you say? That's the part about bringing judgment to them before the Lord. And so he says they don't even know that they are living on borrowed time in their brazenness. They haven't got a clue. That's how bold these guys are. And then it goes on and says, but these are like unreasoning animals, born as creatures of instinct to be captured and killed, reviling where they have no knowledge, will in the destruction of those creatures also be destroyed. Suffering wrong is the wages of doing wrong. So he's saying that these false teachers, they're kind of running by instinct. They're kind of shooting off at the mouth. They're shooting off at the mouth out of ignorance about who they're offending of the real spiritual reality. They're shooting off at the mouth, and eventually, like instinctual animals, they'll be herded up and destroyed. I mean, they're going to be reviling God himself and the powers that are at God's demand. And these unthinking animals eventually just find judgment in hell. That's really what he's saying right here. So they can spout off all they want for now and say, look, God's not killing me now. He must not exist. Dude, you don't want to go there. You don't want to go there. And that's what he's saying. These guys are so brazen and so ignorant, they'll actually challenge the reality of God and his judgment and his watching the very things we do. These guys are brazen. And they shoot high. They actually deny God and his power against us and challenge God to strike me down if I'm lying, and he doesn't. Those kinds of guys. So they go way over the top. So first thing I can say right here is they're arrogant revilers. I'm going to make a list around this guy. That's a good way. Yeah.
Is angels on the earth now?
Are there angels on the earth right now? I think so. Haven't had a visit this week. I don't think I've ever had a visit. But there's ways in which we know biblically that angels do things without calling attention to themselves. And they also do things very much calling attention to themselves. So it would be, who wrestled with an angel? Jacob. Jacob, yeah. Yeah. So there's a reality. And that's what I'm saying. It'd be fun to go back and just take a look. Because there are, I can tell you this, there are cases right now where in countries of the world where there is not much of a strong Christian presence for who Jesus is, whole cultures that are closed off. And I'm thinking principally Muslim countries right now. There is really a very powerful trend toward people coming to know Jesus as Messiah through dreams and through angel visits. And I've read a lot of them. So when God wants to get his message across, and this is what I always say about angels, when God wants to get a message across, he will not fail to get his message across, even if he has to use his angelos, his messengers. But if he can get the message across without using those guys, he will. And he does. And many times, I'll read a couple words in Scripture, and I will have gotten it. And God says, well, that's all we got to do for him. But sometimes due to circumstances, God uses angels, and he does this very day for the purpose of getting the message across. Angelos messengers, okay? Good question, though. Okay, arrogant revilers. They aim high. They even take down the powers of God and challenge them to take them out right now, and that's how brazen they are. Also, he goes on. He says in verse 13, they count it a pleasure to revel in the daytime. They are stains and blemishes, reveling in their deceptions as they carouse with you, having eyes full of adultery that never cease from sin, enticing unstable souls, having a heart trained in greed, accursed children. Whoa. Now, these are false teachers. Keep in mind, this isn't just, there's very bad people on the earth, and here's some of them. No, these are false teachers. These are characteristics of false teachers. I mean, we'll look a little at a time here. They count it as a pleasure to revel in the daytime. They do things that most normal people would say, we should do that in the dark because I don't want anyone to see me doing it. But they do it in the daytime. They don't care. I mean, they're so outwardly out there, they actually revel in the daytime, which is something in the ancient world and even ours is just totally unbelievable. They will do things and be part of a lifestyle that they are so bold and so confident about, they don't have to hide in the dark. They just do it out in the daylight. Say, look at me. Hey, God, if this is wrong, strike me down. 1,000, 2, 1,000. See how great I am? That's what they do. They revel in the daytime. They are daylight sinners. And, it makes sort of sense because a false teacher has to be very bold and very confident in their message. And so if you're doing it in the dark all the time, it makes it look like you're not proud of your message. They bring it out there and they just go, ta-da, we need to do this out in the open. There we go. That's how right I am. God, strike me down. See, do it in the open. So they're very brazen, and they have great arrogance when it comes to reviling. And they're so proud of it, they'll even do it in the daylight. They don't have to hunker down in the dark. That's how proud they are, what they do. They also celebrate deception. See that? He says they revel in their deceptions as they carouse with you. They're actively deceiving people to join them in what they do, and then they're celebrating it. Look, I fooled all those people. Here we go. They're with me now. They revel in their deception, which again is astonishing. Deception is something that we say, hey, deception, isn't that wrong? Yes, that's wrong. Isn't telling lies wrong? Yes, that's wrong. But they are so good at it, they like to broadcast how good they're at it. They revel in it. I'm a great deceiver. I've done more than any other man too. I shouldn't finish that quote. Tito?
So we're assuming that they're not deceived, that they really know what they're doing?
Are they deceived or they know what they're doing? Hard to tell. Maybe they're self-deceived, they believe what they're doing. Doesn't really matter. They revel in the fact, which means they celebrate publicly the fact that they can bring other people with them and deceive them to bring them with them. Whether they're self-deceived or not, it's a whole different issue. The issue is they're proud of the fact that they can take us with them. And they revel in that. And they don't hide that. It also says right here about the sexual stuff. It says they carouse with you, having eyes full of adultery that never cease from sin, enticing unstable souls. And I call this a sexual predator because it says they have eyes for this. They have eyes full of adultery. That doesn't just say they're adulterous. That means they're looking at who they can be adulterous with. They're predators. They're absolute predators. Sexual predators. So in these people that they've deceived to bring with them, that they're proud about their deception, and their brazen disregard for the spiritual consequences of it all, they're saying, now that I got all these people around them, let's see who can participate in my sexual fulfillment. And so they have eyes for adultery. False teachers? Yeah, false teachers. Another one he says right here, I categorize here, greedy. Having a heart trained in greed. He doesn't just say they're greedy. They have a heart trained in greed. That means they're quite skillful at it. That means when they have, quiet little moments in their lives where they fantasize about the best thing that could happen to them, their heart thinks about how to make more money. Their hearts are trained in greed. These guys live and breathe for gain to them. And if you're suddenly getting a picture that these guys are all about sex and money, you're right. And how to deceive you to accomplish their goals. And that's what Peter's getting at here. So let me add this to our poor guy right here. They're arrogant revilers, daylight sinners, sexual predators, greedy, and they celebrate deception. So what does Peter think of false teachers? Oh, man, it gets worse. Here we go. Let's make it worse. 15, forsaking the right way, they've gone astray, having followed the way of Balaam, the son of Beor, who loved the wages of unrighteousness. But he received a rebuke for his own transgression, for a mute donkey, speaking with the voice of a man, restrained the madness of the prophet. What? Well, if you don't know this story, it's over here in Numbers. It occupies Numbers 22, 23, 24, and 25. There are 4 chapters dedicated to Balaam in the Old Testament. So if you don't know what that's all about, go check it out.
Wasn't there a whole lot of temples built to worship Baal?
Oh, absolutely, to worship the false gods, yeah. But it turns out that Balaam's role in this entire thing is very interesting. So I'll give you a Balaam 101, but I want you to go read it yourself, because that's a lot of chapters in the Old Testament to dedicate to one guy. And all we talk about is Balaam and his donkey talking to him. Which, okay, that's weird. Okay, that's weird. But you got to see the context of the story, because it's really fascinating. But here's what's going on. When you go back to these chapters and Numbers, there's this guy who's kind of like a wizard, in a way. He's got a reputation worldwide that when he curses a people, his curses come true, and when he blesses a people, his blessings come true. So sure enough, the Israelites have left Egypt. They're on their way into the Promised Land. They're parked, not quite in the Promised Land yet. They're on the wrong side of the Jordan, but they're parked right next to this king and his nation. And he goes, oh my gosh, there's no way we can win this war against all these Israelites who are just camped right here. There's millions of them. What are we going to do? And so he says, I know what we can do. Let's call Balaam. And we'll have Balaam come out. We'll pay him a lot of money and say, here's a lot of money, Balaam. Come out here, and all you got to do is stand on this mountain and curse these people, and we'll be okay, because we know that whoever you curse goes away, and whoever you bless prospers. So that's what we got to do. So sure enough, the story unfolds, and they send 2 actually delegations to Balaam to come bring him, because he doesn't live where these guys are living on the eastern side of the Dead Sea. Balaam lives way up in present-day Iraq. So, they had to send someone up to go find him and say, oh, great Balaam, here's a whole ton of gold bricks. Will you come and curse these people for us, because we're just totally outclassed? They do it twice. He finally agrees to take the money and come over. When he takes the money and comes over, and after God tells him, don't do it, don't curse these people, because these people are blessed. And he first time he agrees with God and says, okay, I won't do it. And then the second time it figures, but gosh, that's a lot of money. It's a lot of money. Maybe I should just go and check out the situation. And I can curse them when I get there, but gosh, that's a lot of money. Oh, a lot of money. So he goes and he gets on his donkey, and God basically intercepts him a couple times on his way, and finally once through his donkey, who turns around and says to him, what are you doing? And then amazingly, you got to read the story. It's just great. And amazingly, Balaam starts a 2-way conversation with the donkey, and Balaam never goes, hey, you're talking. He just is talking with the donkey. And the long and short of it is God has sent an angel with a sword to stop Balaam from coming. And he's blocking the way, and the donkey can see the angel, and Balaam can't. And so finally he realizes the donkey saved his life. Because the angel finally says to him, if that donkey hadn't stopped, you'd be dead. You got to read this story. It's incredible. But the key to the Balaam story, well, we got to put the donkey in there. Yeah, okay. That's not the key to the Balaam story. The key to the Balaam story is the fact that he accepted money to take down God's people. That's the point of the story. And he's famous for that. That's his reputation then through the entire Bible. Here's a guy who accepted the money from a pagan group of people, a king, who accepted the money on the basis that he would come and with his curses annihilate God's beloved people. And he did it all for money. All for money. Now the story's bigger than that, and you got to read it. It's an incredible story. Numbers 22 to 25. If you don't have anything to do someday, just read them. It's great. It's a great story. But anyway, that's the whole deal. So what Peter is saying right here is that these false teachers have done exactly what Balaam has done. That is, they're accepting money to destroy God's beloved people. That's the transaction they've made. That's the transaction they've made. The only reason that they're in this whole false teaching business is not spiritual. It's money. Just like Balaam. That's the point he's making right here. And yet he adds this thing about the donkey here because, at least in Balaam's case, his donkey warned him that he was in danger. In these false teachers' case, they don't have donkeys telling them. That's how brazen and uncommunicative they are. They have no clue the danger they're putting themselves into. What they need is donkeys who will speak straight with them. And they don't even have that. So these guys are in a bad way. So I called them hired mercenaries because that's what a mercenary is. A mercenary fights to destroy a people for no reason other than money. There's no ideologies involved. There's no spiritual issues involved. It's just all about the green stuff. So they're hired mercenaries. Now let me ask you this. If they're hired mercenaries, who hired them? Satan did. He basically said, if you take advantage of these people and you take them down, you can get what you've always wanted. Money and sex. And that's what they're all about. That's the only reason why they're involved in this. There's no great, wonderful, highfalutin spiritual ideals. That's what they're in this for. That's what they're in it for. Hired mercenaries. He goes on. It gets worse. Verse 17. These are springs without water, mists driven by a storm, for whom the black darkness has been reserved. Black darkness has been reserved. Well, look at that springs without water. You've seen this scene before many times in movies, the desert oasis thing out there, and the poor guy's dying. He's just got this much energy left to be able to crawl his way to life where that water is. And it says, water, 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 and then he gets there and it's dry. That's exactly what these guys are like. They're springs, but they don't have any water. They promise, but they don't deliver. They're all, hi, I'm a wonderful palm tree in the middle of the desert. Come my way and you'll find rest and water and everything will be fine. And once you've exhausted your last energy for your last chance, you'll find that they offer nothing. It's really a sad case with false teachers. Really sad. Mists driven by a storm, he uses that because mists many times in Israel, mists provided dew for the plants. And in a lot of the agriculture in Israel, since they're up on mountains, the dew overnight was what watered the plants. It wasn't a rainstorm. But a mist that's there will water the plants unless a storm comes and just blows the mist away. I mean, it's like a promise of dew. Never mind, and the storm blows it away. So it's the same kind of idea. It's a promise without a result is what it is. That's what these guys are like. And because of that, the black darkness has been reserved for them. They actually have a name on the table that sits in hell. Excuse me, can I get a reservation for one? Yes, it's already been made for you. Thank you. That's what he's talking about. So the false promises, I can't even say it strongly enough. It's all about false promises. False promises. They are springs without water. And the unfortunate part of it is like that little picture. You don't understand how waterless they are until you get right with them. There's promise on the outside. And many times you sell everything you've got to kind of participate with these guys. And you don't realize that there's actually nothing there until you get close enough to realize, gosh, there's nothing there. And then many times you can't get out of the situation because you've given them all your resources. Remember that last effort to get to the oasis? And you're trapped. And it's very hard to get out. That's what we call a cult. Jim Jones is a great example. They never got out. Yeah. I've got another example for us at the end here. You can wonder about it. Okay, that's exactly right, Bob, just like Jim Jones. For speaking out arrogant words of vanity, by the way, vanity is all about me. Yeah. For speaking out arrogant words of vanity, they entice by fleshly desires, by sensuality. Here comes the sex again. Those who barely escape from the ones who live in error. I mean, they're already having a hard time trying to figure out what's right and wrong. Promising them freedom, while they themselves are slaves of corruption. For by what a man is overcome, by this he's enslaved. Arrogant vanity. Now, why is it that false teachers can get away with arrogant vanity? Because most of us, I mean, come on, if you're up against someone tomorrow who's just totally filled with themselves, you go, oh, never mind. Right? I mean, your impulse isn't to embrace them. Your impulse is to say, when you get over yourself, let's talk. But, nah, not right now. So I looked at this and thought, what's attractive about the arrogant vanity of a false teacher? Well, to the same degree that they're over-the-top bold in their reviling of the spiritual powers, they also have to paint themselves as the center of the universe so you buy into their plans. I'm one of the greatest people who've ever spoken for God. Listen to my words and you will find life. Follow me and we'll have utopia or whatever. They have to actually build themselves up. And something in our psyche who wants what they're delivering to us is willing to put away our revulsion with that kind of vanity and say, he's wonderful. And you buy into it. And they can't do it a little bit. They've got to go over the top and do it. They have to really make the case strong and big. This is one of those cases where you win not by being kind of halfway, but by being way in over the top. I mean, just way in. And many times these deceivers, the way that they can do it is because they're way over the top. And you figure, if they weren't that confident about themselves, they must not be the real thing. But this guy, he knows who he is. I'm going with him. And we have, for some reason, a herd mentality built into us, where when we see someone who is that confident about themselves, who makes such outrageous claims about themselves, that if a stranger made to us tomorrow, we'd say, right. But there's something about us that we go, yes, I'm following you, right? That's all he's saying. They're just way over the top in terms of this arrogant vanity. Also, he says right here, I just put in free love, because see what he says? They entice by fleshly desires. They're telling you what you want to hear in terms of that, fulfilling that desire for you, with sensuality, people who barely escape the others who are giving them error, promising them freedom when they themselves are slaves of corruption. So it's really kind of a free love thing. It's a sensuality, it's the sexuality involved with that, telling you what you really want to be involved in that sense, and saying, it's all free, come and just be part of that. And I put the free love thing there because that was the big phrase that was used when I was growing up in the 60s with the whole hippie movement, You need to put off all the authoritarian constraints that keep you from enjoying this wonderful part of life that you can enjoy. And they're just telling you not to do it because they don't want you to have any fun. But you know what? We need to have love be free, not constrained. Not love divided, but love multiplied. That's from a polygamy show. But that's what I'm saying. They're claiming that you need to be involved in this, and you can do it, electively. It's not going to be captive or anything. You're not going to be stuck in something because of this. But the irony, he says, is the fact that they are slaves of that corruption. They can't get out of it if they wanted to. And they just want to invite other people to get enslaved with them. That's what it's all about. Free love. Oh, yeah, free. Slaves of corruption. For what a man is overcome, this is what he's enslaved by. And we're talking like the real slave enslavement, where you're in it, but you can't get out of it. You're part of a lifestyle that someone seems to dictate, and you can't seem to free yourself from it. That's what it is, slaves to corruption. So they offer this thing about freedom. They promise freedom, but the very content of the thing that they're promising enslaves you. And that, my friends, is the thumbprint of Satan himself. Without question. Freedom! You're stuck. And that's how he does it. That's exactly how he does it. Sex and money. Sex and money. It's a great story. People go, hey, okay. Yeah. Sex, money, power. Okay, we'll throw power in it too. What are you getting at, JC? But yeah, there is. I know.
It's a gutting, and I just
It's a.
Kept going, but the men that have gone up, that spoke with Grant Palmer or had those meetings, they're just stuck.
They're stuck.
They start out pretty good,
Yeah, and many times you have to get close enough to it to see it.
And so how do you get out there?
And then you realize the promises are like springs without water. There's nothing to it. And that's the dangerous part. That's why Peter's telling us right here, don't even get started with these guys. You don't want to have to get that far into it that you realize there's nothing to it. I can save you all that heartbreak, he's saying. If you're seeing this stuff, you need to say, oh, I don't think so. Something's wrong. There is power implicit in all of this. There is power implicit in all of this. In fact, they're claiming they're more powerful than all the powers of heaven, and they're reviling them openly. So there really is an arrogance and a power that's implicit in all of this. And by the way, you would be misstepping if you didn't understand that these guys' power is actually aided and empowered by Satan himself. I mean, he really has a way of doing this. And he uses it through enticing, through these natural enticements of sex and money and stuff like that. Those are natural enticements. But there's something more that goes on with these guys. And I think, when you do study with cults and stuff like that, you see it. These guys have something. They can walk in a room and people want to follow these guys. How is that possible? So it's just got to be, it's dangerous. Okay, I'm cluttering my slide here. False promises, free love. Okay, we got those guys on there. Okay. So what's their final state? Peter wraps it up. Here's their final state. Verse 20. What'd you say? Utah. No, wrong state. Wrong state, true. Okay, here we go. Verse 20. For if after they have escaped the defilements of the world by the knowledge of the Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, and they are again entangled in them and are overcome, the last state has become worse than the first. So he's not implying that these guys, these false teachers, have become Christians. He's just saying they've been involved enough in the Christian community. They've seen the regeneration that goes on in the lives of people who follow Christ. They see what it is to love about goodness and the ethics and the moral and serving other people. They see all of that. And if they value all that and they see it in community, and then they say, whatever, let's go greed and sex. And if they go back to that again and start teaching something that's opposite to that, their last state has become worse for them than the first. It would have been better for them. It would have been better for them if they had just never been a part of that. And never understood what community with Christ and with the God who loves us sacrificially, what that's all about. It would have been better if they never knew that. Because now they're going to have to answer for the fact that you knew this stuff. You knew this stuff. And yet you openly rejected it. You openly rejected it with a deliberately deceptive message that you gather the people to you with that talks about what you gain in the whole thing in terms of money and sex. And you think that is better than living in community with God himself. You don't want to be standing in front of the judgment with that on your head. You just don't. And that's what he's saying. It would have been better for them if they just stayed the way they were. 21, for it would be better for them not to have known the way of righteousness than having known it, to turn away from the holy commandment handed to them. I don't even have to say anything about that. That's just their state. It's happened to them according to the true proverb. A dog returns to its own vomit. Exactly. That's how you're supposed to react. And a sow, after washing, returns to wallowing in the mire. By the way, that's from Proverbs, 26. So that's exactly what they're saying. At one time, they were involved in all this nasty stuff, greed and sex and whatever it takes and all those pagan things. And then they came to understand life with God. They didn't participate in it. That is, the payment that Christ made for them was sufficient, but it wasn't efficient. They never took it to themselves and did. But they understood it. They understood it. And then they went back to it. It's the same thing as a dog going back to its vomit. The dog left at first going, ugh, ugh, and then came back to it and said, hey, that looks pretty tasty. It's exactly the picture of these people, he's saying. Yeah, Larry. Yeah, the Israelites who came out of Egypt wanted to go back, and that's exactly the same thing. They were in the wilderness, yeah, and they made this decision. Do we want what God is promising to us in terms of life in the promised land, and life with God, or do we want to go back to the tangible junk that we were doing, going back to slaves in Egypt? At least they gave us meat to eat. That's what they said. So yeah, it's exactly the same kind of thing. That God said, I'm sorry, you're not coming in the promised land because you prefer to go back to the life of enslavement, which these guys did. They want to go back to the life of enslavement rather than to a life that's apportioned by the love of God. Whew. Yeah, what they did in the wilderness is exactly the same as this. A sow after washing returns to wallowing in the mire. Oh, look how clean I am. Ooh, mud, let's do it. Woo. Yeah, that's what's happened to them. So let's summarize. That's a picture of a false teacher. And if you look at it closely, you realize that their entire motivation is themselves. And whatever they can use to manipulate the people they can deceive into serving themselves. And that's what it is. You will always see in different proportions with false teachers different amounts of the different pieces of these things. But all these pieces will be there. By the way, the part where Peter got really mad and he couldn't even speak his Greek right is the one we just finished. Just whoa. Yeah. So that's what we just... So he's saying that these guys live for themselves. They are satanically enabled to deceive people in such a way that they can use people to serve their selfish goals. Their selfish goals. It's very characteristic. The first time that you ever see a teacher who starts talking about what you have to do with your money in order to provide for them and for the bigger, larger thing, you got to go, your little red lights ought to go off. They really ought to go off. Because these guys are trying to figure out how to channel all that cash to themselves. And if they start teaching things that start to edge up into areas of sexual propriety and saying, no, that's not really wrong, really, let me show you how it's not wrong. Then you need to be a little alerted about that. Because the Bible is actually very clear about sexual activity outside of marriage. It's very clear about that. So when that starts to get chipped away with, and they say, well, it's not really sex outside of marriage. It's just another wife. There's clever ways to do this. But if you start seeing these are fingerprints of false teachers, he's saying. These are fingerprints. And they always are self-serving. To the degree to which a teacher teaches and it serves people in their understanding of God and drawing them near to God, then you're okay. But all of a sudden, if it starts to seem like it's channeling and focusing and puddling up in the best for this twisted teacher, you need to go away running with your hair on fire. You really, really do. And that should be easy to spot. The problem is that all of these aspects, the false teacher knows how to moderate them inside the culture so he's not spotted easily. But this will always be aspects of who he is. Always. Always. So we talked 2 weeks ago about the false message, or last week about the false message. And we also talked about the fact that you can live in the midst of 1,000 false teachers and God will still deliver you. That was the second part of this chapter. I mean, he'll protect you from these guys, even when you can't see it all. But in the end, Peter's saying, you got to understand, these guys are living for themselves at your expense. And if you see any indicators of either money or sex, that's usually the hint right off the top that there's something upside down here. Something totally upside down.
The incredible thing is, as it was back then,
It is today. As it was back then, it is today. False teachers are still false teachers. And they will always try and disconnect you from life with God for a counterfeit of life like I'm living with excessive money and sex. They'll always try and swap those two around. But they'll do it culturally, carefully, so you don't spot it at first. But please, if you see that anywhere in the edges of it, you need to run away and question it. That's all Peter's saying. That's their motivation. That's their heart. These guys have no interest in your good, only their good. Let me summarize a little bit with this guy. It's been long enough that a lot of people don't even know who this guy is. Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh. He was a guru from India in the 80s, I think it was. And he had the audacity to actually buy a town in Oregon and move 7,000 of his followers there, and they took over that whole region of Oregon. Now, he has some nicknames. One of them comes from this. When he would come into the compound, he would drive one of his, I think at the time, 70 Rolls Royces. And his followers liked so much that he enjoyed Rolls Royces that his followers gave all of their money to him, and they made a plan to figure out how he could have a different Rolls Royce every day. They wanted to buy him 365 Rolls Royces. I had a picture I didn't have time to put in, but there's a picture of a dirt road out there in the middle of Oregon with a line of Rolls Royces parked next to each other. There's something like 40, something like that. So he came to be called different names. There he is enjoying stuff with, look, it's all women behind him. He was called the rich man's guru. He was called the sex guru. He was called the Rolls Royce guru. And the interesting thing is that his followers loved that about him. And he said, if you follow me, riches will come to you like they've come to me. May not be in this life, might be in a reincarnated life. But he says, eventually you'll get there to where you'll be in my same position and enjoying life the way I have it. His recommendations for sexual stuff is not well known, but it was gross. And that's not a coincidence that there's all those ladies behind him right there. And in mixed company, we can't talk about this. But let me just show you a quote. Later, the Bhagwan was called Osho. To this very day, his followers call him Osho. And I got this off of Wikipedia. I always trust everything on Wikipedia. But so I'm just qualifying that. His ideas on sex and marriage and family and relationships contradicted traditional views, which is a real understatement. Arousing anger and opposition around the world, his movement was feared and despised as a cult. He lived, get this, in ostentation and offensive opulence. Ostentatious, and it's all about the money in this case. And an offensive opulence. While his followers, most of whom had severed ties with outside friends and family and donated all or most of their money and possessions to the commune, law of consecration, might live at a subsistence level. They lived in tents in the middle of Oregon, while this guy had a whole string of Rolls Royces and dealt with sexual therapies for the people who came from him for need. And they just loved him. At one point, it peaked at 7,000 people living out in the middle of Oregon. And they started doing illegal things. They started having problems with the city council. And I'm not making any connections here. So don't go there. But they had some problems because the cities around there were threatened by these people that his right-hand man, who was a woman, so I guess it's a right-hand woman, orchestrated actually a bio-attack, which is the largest bio-attack to date in the record in the United States, where they went to Sizzlers and other kind of places where they had open salad bars and took, was it salmonella? I can't remember. I think it was salmonella in spray bottles and sprayed all the lettuce and everything on this. And no one died, but a lot of people came pretty close. Scores of people. And that's what they did to kind of make things go. So this is a classic. This is a classic representation. And this guy was popular with middle-income Americans. Why in the world? Why in the world? And as you're saying that and saying, I would never go for that. Yes, you would. And many people still do to this very day. And some of our neighbors do. So you need to be just very, very careful. But the Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh had all of the elements of this. He was brazen. He spoke about crazy stuff. He talked about lots of money. He forced you to give him all of your money so that he could be rich, but you thought it was an investment in your own richness in the future. He promised free love, which is what they did as a therapeutic way to get around the modern ills that people came to follow him for. He said a whole bunch of nonsensical things, but he was brazen in his attack against God. Classic. Now, I'm not going to make a connection to other false teachers that you're familiar with, but you'll see these same fingerprints in varying degrees in different places as you go along. And I'm just going to leave it with that. Next week, we're going to talk about God's clock. The reason he brings this up transitionally is because, remember, he said that these guys act as though God's not coming back to call account on them. Peter's going to say, well, let me just tell you about God's clock and his coming back. And this should put the fear in them, and it kind of puts the fear in us as well, in a good way, So next week about God's clock. But let me tell you this, and I just say this really seriously. Anytime where you're listening to teaching, mine included, by the way, any teaching, that you start to pick up elements of these things, you need to go directly to God and say, God, I don't want to be deceived. You told me in the middle of this chapter that even though I might be surrounded by this kind of fallen, deceitful junk, that just like Noah was carried through the judgment of the flood, you can carry me through this as well. So I need you to give me eyes that see and ears that hear, and I need to test what's going on here. And the best way to test what you're hearing is that book in your lap. You need to compare it against that. Now, we take this same criteria and we apply it against Jesus. Was Jesus into free love? Enticing people, heart filled with adultery? Was he all about the money? Way not. And you can go through all of these things, and you can even see how it wasn't about him, it wasn't about building him up in that sense. Although of all the people in the entire Bible, he was worthy of that. But Paul tells us that he came low and became a man, and got even lower by dying as a man. And he lost everything in order to purchase us back. That's the central message that even false teachers don't want you to understand. The purchase of him, a purchase made for us. He gave everything. And he says, if you want to be one of my disciples and follow me, you got to follow the same path. Take up your cross and follow me. Which is why I love the cross idea for Christmas. Because it's a dominant picture of love embodied in sacrifice for those who don't deserve it. Now, when you see that kind of sacrificial love, you know you're on the right track. But when you see someone says, send your first 1,000 to me and I will quadruple it to $4,000, and if you stay in the ministry, then we'll all have 10,000 I made, and next time, you'll know, stop. It should be all about going low, not going high. And so test everyone you hear. And like Peter says earlier, he says, and I'll replicate the same words, there's a day coming where I won't be here and Peter's not here. But by way of reminder, you got to remember to do this in everything you hear. Test everything. Absolutely everything. Please test everything and all the teachers. Okay? And it's not an insult. Paul went traveling through his missionary journeys and came through a little town called Berea. And when he left Berea, he got word of the fact that when he left there, they checked up on him in the Old Testament. Well, didn't they trust him? And he said, good for them. Good for them. That's exactly what they should be doing. And that's what we should do.
Instead of go shopping.
Instead, oh, let's shop, yeah. We are not cafeteria Christians looking for what suits us and what doesn't. There's one word of God. Okay, well, let's pray. Father, we thank you for this stern warning. And we thank you that you protect us in the midst of the craziest false doctrine and false teachers. And Lord, because we know that they are predatory, it sobers us to know that there are people actively out there looking to deceive us, to include us in their schemes, and to separate us from you, actively doing so. And that this is the fingerprint of Satan himself, whose intention is to steal and to kill and to destroy. Lord, you know how to save those who follow you. And so we put our lives in your hands, and we entrust your ability to protect our minds and our hearts from lies, from deception. And Lord, we pray that as time goes on, that you would deepen our love for your word, and that as we not only deepen our love for your word, that we would gain eyes that see in ways we've never seen before. And as a result, we can spot these guys way down the block rather than having to join their organizations to discover it. And Lord, engage us as well as heralds in this community and this society that proclaim the fact of your coming and proclaim the error of the false teachers who are doing what is the most reprehensible thing in your heaven, which is to counteract your words. Lord, when you speak and the heavens snap into obedience and create light, then we know that your word is not to be trifled with. And these men in such brazen way try and trifle with it. So Lord, save us from this, and we thank you for your word that is such a steady guide, and your Holy Spirit that is a steady interpreter for us of all things true. So thank you now for your great love for us in Jesus' name.